Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Higher Ed Live. I'm Dr. Kevin Sansberry, joining from Cincinnati, Ohio, and this week I'll be serving as your host. I'm the founder and behavioral scientist with Kevra the Culture Company and host of the Toxic Leadership Podcast. Higher Ed Live has offered direct access to the best and the brightest minds in higher education and allowed audience members to share knowledge and participate in discussions around the most important issues in our industry. All episodes are free and can be accessed at higheredlive.com or take Higher Ed Live with you on the go by subscribing to the podcast wherever you listen. Higher Ed Live is produced by Platform Q Education, the leading developer of online engagement software and strategies. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to our newsletter below and connect with us on social media using the hashtag Higher Ed Live. For our podcast listeners, all of this information will be available in the episode notes. This week, we are discussing the role of DE&I in admissions and are lucky to have Sonja Jordan and Jasmine Rosario. So I'd love for you all to introduce yourselves.
Hi, thank you for having me today. My name is Jasmine Rosario. I am a Senior Assistant Director of Admission in the Office of Undergraduate Admission for UMass Amherst.
Welcome.
I'm Sonja Jordan. I am Campus Diversity Lead and then Coordinator for the Minority Student Scholarship at Ivy Tech Community College in Terre Haute, Indiana. Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. Well, we're so excited to have this conversation because as we dig into DE&I, this is a really important conversation and topic to have, especially as it relates to admissions and in the higher ed space. And so my first question is high level, but through the work that you're doing, from your perspective, how do you conceptualize the words diversity, equity, and inclusion?
I can go. Mm-hmm. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I think we hear those words a lot, and everyone kind of has various, definitions for what that means. For me, it's very broad, but specific at the same time, right? So diversity is essentially just kind of like a replica of what this world looks like. Do we have people on our campus that are representing the various walks of life? Race and ethnicity, socioeconomic background, religious background, gender diversity, various abilities, right? Just all people, as well as kind of thinking of it in a smaller scale when it comes to our majors and the students that are represented in different areas. So, STEM, is it very male heavy? Do we want more females in STEM? Nursing, education, is that more female heavy? Do we want more males in those areas? So really just kind of diversifying by using the word in the definition, and not having just kind of one type of student on our campus represented, in the larger community, but in those smaller areas as well. Equity, essentially, and kind of like the root of the word equality and giving students, similar access to things. So for that, to me, all students should have the same ability to access resources, to access opportunities, and for our staff and our larger campus community to meet them where they are. So if they have learning differences, providing those resources so that they're able to access things the same way as students who may not have learning differences. If it's physical ability, making sure that our campus is accessible to move around, really just making sure that among this diverse population, no one is feeling left out, no one is feeling, secluded, no one is feeling forgotten. And then inclusion, really, I think about, oftentimes we think, okay, well, diversity. And so does that mean, others and not myself, right? And so inclusion is really the focus of us making sure that even though we're representing everyone has equal access, that no one feels excluded, right? Everyone feels like they're part of this larger community. Even if you are maybe able-bodied, that you don't feel like, well, diversity only means those with disabilities, but it means both, right? And that both students have access to the same types of things. So I always tell students whenever we host DEI events that every student is welcome, that this is not specific if you're first generation. It's not specific if you're a POC. It might be geared toward, it might have, additional elements that would draw a specific student, but that it's not meant to exclude anyone, to kind of create that. So long answer for your question.
No, thank you. That was really insightful. I appreciate hearing from you. Sonja.
I think that I would just have to parrot what Jasmine shared. For me, it's the same thing. It is keeping in mind that diversity goes well beyond race, which I feel like that is something that we tend to focus on quite a bit in the United States, that it is about different abilities, age, background, SES, whatever the case may be, that we are all invited to whatever event or, to earn an education, that is diversity, to really include all of those groups of people. And the same thing as far as equality, just making sure that we are providing the tools that are necessary so that everyone has a shot or an opportunity. And the same thing goes with inclusion. And we really focus on belonging as well. That is part of our strategic plan at Ivy Tech, is that, inclusion and belonging go hand in hand. Not only, are you included, but we want you to feel as though you are welcome and that you belong in the space, that you are welcome to have an education, but also your views, your differently abledness, that you also belong in the conversation.
Thank you. And that's touching upon something I wanted to ask next. And it was specifically about the notion of belonging. Most organizations are starting to talk about that more, where there is a difference between inclusion and belonging, and diversity is not belonging. And so one of the things I'm curious about is, as we think about that notion of belonging, how do you engage the entire community, whether that's students, faculties, et cetera?
And jump in. That is something that we're really focusing on with Ivy Tech, is respect and just making sure that we include those types of things, where we are including more training and programming to make people feel as though they belong, increasing our number of faculty and staff that maybe belong to the Black and Brown community, and not just focusing on, do we have enough women? Do we have enough men? It's not diversity. We want faces that look like your face, or we want you to have that community here so that you feel like you belong here. So an example of that is in Terre Haute. It's not a very heavily populated area. It is a city, but it has a very small town feel. They've recently opened Pride Center of Terre Haute, and my goal as our diversity officer, whatever you want to call me, is that we partner with them so that we do have students that, up front, maybe you don't realize they belong to the LGBTQ plus community, but that we can provide them with a sense of belonging by making sure that, we take into consideration things about pronouns and understanding people that are transgender, so that they do feel as though they belong, so that they feel as though they have those resources.
I appreciate hearing, how you all are kind of doing it on the ground. Jasmine, what would you add?
I would echo what Sonja was saying. With the various representation of departments as well as student groups. When we're planning our events and we're inviting, various students, we're not just thinking, let's invite these students because they fit these certain demographics and then just throw on an event that just makes them feel kind of targeted or maybe even tokenized, but really to invite them to campus and then invite the various resources on campus that can support them, so that they know that this is not just, motions, but that really there is an office or a group of students who you can connect with and find a community with. So, the Stonewall Center for our LGBTQ plus students. We want them represented at our events so that, you know, they know that the students who are coming knows that there's resources, their faculty, their staff, their students who are invested in making sure that they thrive on our campus. You know, the various cultural student organizations. We have quite a few on our campus. So it's important that our students know that they're there. So if they identify as Haitian American, they know there's a Haitian American Student Association, and it's not just for show, that it's really there. Students are involved, and there's a lot of ways to connect. So yeah, really just connecting with our largest campus community, that it's not just an event run by my department for the sake of numbers, right? That it's not a quota situation, but it's really like, we want you to come here. We want you to pick what's the best fit for you. And hopefully you can find a community within this larger space, that it's not, you know, it's not an act. And then if it doesn't fit, then that's okay too, because we want you to go where you feel comfortable.
Yeah. And I appreciate hearing from both of you on that notion, because I think many wrestling with is, how can we embed our actions to not feel like flavor of the months and to feel truly embedded in the DNA and framework of the organizational structure. And so my next question I want to hear, and feel free to start us off, Jasmine, but I wanted to hear a little bit about what specific steps or recommendations or goals are you actively working on?
A few different things. So on a larger institutional level, the school does put out kind of like campus climate surveys and asks students and asks faculty and staff, you know, what they think the campus is doing well and what they think that we could do better. That's something that I even ask when I'm interviewing students to work with us on our team. What are we doing well? What can we do better? Because we want that community input so that we know what action steps we need to be taken. So from a campus, pulse survey, recommendations were given to each of our departments on what we could be doing. And then we have our own, internal strategic plans. So for the Office of Admission, I mean, it's focused on recruitment and yield. We want to make sure that we are providing a lot of different informational resources at the very beginning so that students feel that they're able to kind of navigate this process easily. So I don't know if you want specifics, so for example, UMass Amherst has a suite of events called UREP UMass that are geared toward all different things. So for example, we have a Real Talks event, which is essentially student-centered. And we did this virtually this past year because we needed to do it in a virtual space where prospective students could connect with UMass Amherst students and have a very candid, open conversation about what it's like to be on campus with various identities. So maybe we would reach out to students who come from rural, small towns that are not used to maybe being in a city or in a larger space, and they have a million questions that they want to ask. So we reach out to current UMass Amherst students who come from rural backgrounds, who come from small towns, who, find UMass Amherst to be a completely different environment that they're what they're used to. And they're the ones on the call who are talking to our prospective students to give firsthand perspective. I also came from a rural area. Here's my answers to how you can navigate this space. So really tapping into our student body and saying, hey, here are some of the ways that you identify. Would you feel comfortable connecting with prospective students to answer their questions? Because if it comes from me, I'm only going to regurgitate what you told me. It might not be as authentic. And I'm a staff member, so they might edit themselves or censor themselves in some of those questions, and we don't want them to. And so that's why we call it real talk. We want those conversations to be real. Hosting programs. Another one we have is called Ready, Set, Apply, where we do walk the students through the process of applying to college. So this is helpful, especially for first generation to college students who don't have family members who they can tap into and say, how do I fill out this app? How do I fill out the FAFSA? What should I be writing about? All of those things. So we host, a half-day workshop and invite students and say, not to worry, we're going to help you through this process. And it's meant to help them through any college application. So even though it's hosted by UMass Amherst, they're going to be able to take those skills to any of the different, schools that they apply to. So kind of just thinking about all the different steps in the application process from when I'm starting to search up until when I'm ready to deposit, and implementing programs each step of the way that students can tap into. Sometimes we're inviting specific groups, like we'll have a real talk, and students can select to identify as LGBTQ plus on the application if they choose to, and then they may be invited to a session specifically with Stonewall. So kind of just, pinpointing the things that they might want to learn more about, and then giving them the option, right? So they're invited. If they don't want to attend, then they might say, that's not an identity that I feel I need to connect with more. Then they don't have to, but sometimes students are just kind of comfortable knowing that because this is a program that's offered, even though they don't register, that the campus community itself finds this to be something that's important. So maybe alleviate some of that stress at the beginning. So that's kind of what I do, focusing on creating those programs and implementing them and inviting students. And, I can't necessarily speak for what the whole campus community does, but I know that even when it comes to marketing in our, brochures and our, different marketing campaigns that we have across campus, it's always focused on diversity. It's always focused on inclusion. It's always, saying like things like "you belong here" or, diversity matters. All of those things, you can kind of get the sense that the larger campus community also finds it important, and not just the diversity focused team in admissions. I hope that answered your question.
It did. And I appreciate hearing that it's not only a pocket kind of strategy, and that your programs are purposely trying to center the experience of those who apply or not even apply. You're helping people where they are. And so I really appreciate hearing that. Sonja, I want to hear from you, same question. Specifically, what are some of the strategies and implementations that you all are working on?
Jasmine, I want to say you have some amazing programs going on at UMass. So that's so awesome. I wish that we had the ability to do things on that grand a scale. Of course, so much different at a 2-year college to be able to reach people that way, but we are doing things. One of our big initiatives have been just some creations of some additional scholarship to specifically target some of our groups that are not persisting. So for us, the majority of students that nationwide attend community college tend to be students that are Latino or African American. So we are working on programming that specifically targets them first and foremost. So we've implemented some new scholarships for African American males and our single parents as well. Those students aren't persisting. So we're working on programming for them to, ensure that they are staying in school, following through with their programming. And before, as I mentioned about Pride Center of Terre Haute and reaching out to them to come to campus and do some programming with us, our faculty and staff about pronouns and people that are transgender, and then just student programming. And it's very difficult for us to have students to continuously participate in our programming, but it doesn't mean that we don't keep trying. So we have some programming. We have our minority student scholarship that is built as a cohort model so that those group of students are together, and then they're also getting some mentoring. We have a new program called Pathway to Blue. Indiana State University is our public college that's right here in Terre Haute. So we have a program that helps our students go from attending Ivy Tech straight to Indiana State University. A lot of those students come from different backgrounds. And then I'll be working on building a summer bridge program to attract students that are from maybe a rural background. We have a lot of rural area around here. And then students that are either part of the Latinx community or African American to, engage them, get them into a cohort model so that they persist, because persisting is a big deal for us. Especially we're a smaller community and we just do not have a lot of students that belong to a different background, period. We don't have a lot of students that belong to LGBTQ plus community or students that belong to the Black and Brown population. So every initiative that we do is trying to rope those students in, keep them, a part of the college. And of course, we know that in student development, when you feel connected to your college, you're more likely to persist and continue and graduate. And then we're also working really hard to educate our leadership, our faculty and staff, and teach them about the importance of diversity and why we need diversity, and, to help them navigate their diverse classroom, working with those diverse students, implementing some changes in curriculum so that those students feel like they belong in that classroom, that they are, examining materials and scenarios that are going to relate to people that look like them or people from their background. So I hope that answered your question.
Absolutely. And I appreciate and love hearing that not only, you're honest about the numbers, right? And honest about the representation that you do have. But with that being said, you all are still making attempts at involvement and inclusion, and then definitely hearing about the faculty and staff education that's going on, because that's really important as we look at centering DE&I and belonging into our organizational infrastructure. And so, Sonja, to that point, one of the things I'm curious about is, how do you know you are trending in the right direction? So what are some indicators that you are reflecting the culture that you want to be?
Do a lot of report running. So we do look at those numbers. We look at those students that are persisting and that are following through from one semester to the next, and also our graduation numbers. So right now, our African-American females, they're doing great. Our African-American males, not so much. So we know that we need to reach out to them. And then as far as our LGBTQ plus community, faculty and staff and students, we don't have a lot that self-identify. So for me, it's really important that when I do programming in summer, even if it's just the little things, making sure that we've got our pride flags out, or that I've got resources available, because we know that when you belong to the LGBTQ plus community, you can have some other issues, maybe some issues with mental health, or, some acceptance, you're not having acceptance with your friends and family. So just to make sure that we've got that information for those students or faculty and staff that belong to that group, so that they're getting the help that they need. So, we run our numbers, we check, we do some student surveys when we can get some feedback. And really, it's just boots to the ground, asking questions, reaching out to those students. If I see them in my office as an advisor, sharing that information with them. We do still do a lot of printouts when we are on campus, and just setting up during transfer fairs, during our welcome week, just to let the students know, hey, this is diversity. This is what we're about in diversity. Diversity is everybody's job. And just making sure that they know that it's a safe place, a safe space, that you are welcome, faculty and staff, they're all available to our students, so that if there are some concerns, if they do feel as though that they're out of place, that we can still, soothe them and say, hey, we're working on it. This is where we are. But like I said, numbers, and talking to the students.
Echo that. I did want to kind of address something that you mentioned. I think that funding is huge. So, even if you are concerned at all about programming, I think that's an area where UMass Amherst could actually improve, is money. Like, students, we can do all of this work to get them in the door. And then if they get their financial aid package and it's not feasible, then we drop the ball somewhere. And so I think that, creating those scholarships where you maybe can close some gaps is huge. It's much more than I think sometimes we acknowledge. And I'm always saying to my leadership, we need more money, we need more funding. So that's definitely key. But to answer your question, Kevin, similar to what Sonja was saying, that it's data and it's anecdote. So for me, when I'm trying to determine if any of the programs that I'm running are successful, we're looking at how many of the students who are attending these are actually applying, how many who are applying are actually being admitted, kind of looking at that data and saying, okay, we did these programs and this many students applied, but we didn't admit them. Are we being too competitive? What are we doing that is kind of blocking students from being admissible? Because we want, students with good grades and all of those things, but, are we looking at applications equitably? Are we taking into consideration the resources that the high schools are have, are we penalizing a student for not having APs because their school doesn't offer it? Those kinds of things. So we really try to make sure, that's kind of where the equity part comes in, that we're reading students fairly so that they have the same access. And so, for me, the data is important. I know that we get a lot of students who choose to apply after they attend a prospective event. And we do get a lot of students who choose to enroll after they attend an admitted student event, specifically for our UREP UMass overnight program, where we bus students in and they stay on campus and all of that. Annually, I think 4 or 5 years now, we have about an 80% yield. And then our virtual was still a 70% yield. So I was thrilled to see that students were not necessarily turned off by this virtual version of our overnight. Obviously they understood, because it wasn't like we just didn't want to, but obviously we couldn't. But they still felt like they got a lot from these programs and they still chose to enroll. But beyond just the numbers, I always really take anecdote to be data. So I record or I keep my emails or remember conversations from students who would say, like, I wasn't thinking about coming here, or, this was the last on my list, but after I attended this event, it changed my mind. That to me is the best indicator to know if these programs are working, if they matter. Are they receptive to it? And so in my experience, that has been the case. A lot of students were swayed or changed their minds because they attended an event that they found to be beneficial. And then obviously we can see that through data, through the actual numbers when we're running our reports. And then there's some that we just can't measure, but same thing. If I'm getting communication from students who say, I ultimately didn't go to UMass, but thank you so much for all this information. I didn't get this anywhere else. That lets us know that we're also doing our job. So beyond my representation for the university, it's even more important if I'm able to be impactful to the student, regardless of where they enroll.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one commonality that I hear between the two of you is the fact of not only are we using quantitative data and data that we can measure, and we can measure from a numbers standpoint and evaluate impact, we're also looking at qualitative data, anecdotal information, and really trying to gather the experience of individuals as we go from implicit to explicit, as we move from inclusion to belonging. So I really appreciate hearing that from both of you in different ways. And so that brings me to my next question. As you think about where you're headed and as you move forward as an institution, what are some watch fors? So as we think about where we're going, what are some things that you're on the lookout for to say, we don't want to regress, we don't want to move backwards? What are some things there?
I think we're both kind of racking our brains a little, because I know I can think of quite a few things. You mentioned, Sonja, a few times about, making sure that, faculty and staff are trained to use pronouns properly. I think that's definitely a crucial part of improving and, wanting to make sure that we don't regress that way. We have heard of that not being the case sometimes, and students getting misgendered, and that's a big deal. And so, we don't want to go backwards. We're moving towards a more inclusive world, and we're expanding our vocabulary and using more pronouns than we were used to. And that's just the new world, and everyone needs to kind of get on board. So, making sure that those who are adamant about making that change and making sure that it sticks, continue to do so, and that it's not kind of a fad thing that gets left in the past. You don't want the university overall to start feeling as though DE&I work is no longer important. You don't ever want that to be just kind of like a fad or a movement, a moment in time. I think in a perfect world, DE&I work would just kind of be woven into the fabric of every single department, so that it's not necessarily even needs to be its own thing. It doesn't need to be its own department. It doesn't need to be a diversity team within admissions, but everyone does that anyway. So kind of like, rather than what do we not want to regress to, what would we like to see the new future to be like? It's kind of how I'm taking the question. Yeah, just making sure that all this work that we do is not for no reason. And that even though, like, yes, we have reports and we can keep data, if I keep running the same data for the next 5 years and I don't see any major changes, I don't see those numbers increasing, or I don't see these programs getting woven into this larger fabric, is it really successful, or are we still being siloed? And as long as we're kind of cranking out numbers, then you know, the university at large is happy. It wouldn't make me happy. And so really kind of just pushing that to be standard. Yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything, Sonja.
No, I think that that's great. And you're so right. You can't just keep running the numbers and just keep doing the same thing over and over again. And then how you stress that it's all inclusive, you know, with diversity, inclusion, belonging, that it needs to be interwoven. And my fear is burnout. I am afraid that people will become burned out, and then we will regress, and that it will no longer be important. So if it's ingrained and everyone feels like it's their jobs, then we won't regress. That is my fear. And then again, I cannot stress enough that, you know, coming from a community college background, that it looks so different. You know, I can make my comparisons between when I worked at a 4-year to working at a 2-year, and just the difference in the student population and the community. You know, for us, you know, we want to ensure that our student population continues to grow, and that we don't want to regress to having, you know, a low student population, because low student population means that students are not participating in our events, they're not getting involved, and they're not becoming more educated on diversity. And also, I don't want to see us go backwards too with LGBTQ+. That's so important to me right now, because as I mentioned before, that a lot of times that we get very focused on racial relations when it comes to diversity, and we don't think about the other things as far as, you know, issues with ageism and, you know, neglecting people that have different abilities. So I don't want us to go backwards and then just have it focus on that one thing, to just remember what diversity means, and that it's inclusive of so many different people, so many different backgrounds. And again, retention. I just want to keep our retention, keep going forward with our retention for all of our students.
Yeah, this has been great. And I really appreciate hearing from both of you, the importance of intersectionality, and ultimately, in order for us to move forward continually, the importance of internalizing diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging into every member of the institution, to make it real. And so, Jasmine and Sonja, I really appreciate being able to talk with you today on this topic. You've both been very insightful, and I'm sure listeners really appreciate you too.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we're going to wrap up. I'm Dr. Kevin Sansberry, and thanks for listening. Make sure to join Higher Ed Live again next week.